Well, the House has now voted to overturn President Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada. 6 Republicans sided with nearly all Democrats to approve the move. But even if it does clear the Senate, the measure can be vetoed by the president. Speaker Mike Johnson called the vote disappointing and suggested it's pointless. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand joins us now from the White House this morning. Natalie, how did the president react to this sort of rebuke of his tariff plan?
Hi, Chanel and Vlad. Well, as this vote was happening, the president, as he sometimes typically does, took to social media and threatened any Republicans who vote with Democrats that there will be consequences come election time, threatening primaries. These are the 6 Republicans who voted with Democrats against the tariffs on Canada. And they really ranged districts across the country. Now, here's the Post. The president arguing that the tariffs have provided economic and national security. But again, there was a bipartisan message sent to the White House yesterday against these tariffs, even though it was largely symbolic.
Hey guys, welcome. Adam is back. So what just happening right now? House Republicans, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, just voted against Trump in the dead of night. A calculated, orchestrated betrayal by the people he believed he owned completely. It's not a policy disagreement, it's a mutiny. And Trump's only response is a public spiral that's exposing exactly how much his grip on the GOP has slipped. Let's set the stage for this act of political treachery, because the details are what make this story so electrifying and so devastating to Trump's image as the untouchable boss of the conservative movement. A stopgap spending measure landed on the floor of the House of Representatives, a bill designed to do one simple but essential thing: keep the federal government's lights on and its employees paid through the sweltering summer months.
And ahead of that vote on the Canadian tariffs, 3 Republicans also joined with Democrats to vote against a procedural maneuver aimed at blocking resolutions or measures on the floor that would force lawmakers to take votes against these tariffs. On the takeout, CBS News spoke to California Republican Kevin Kiley about his vote against the tariffs. Take a listen.
First and foremost was a big problem for me, is this attempt to reduce the power of members of the House. And then this is also, just authority that the House of Representatives has under Article 1 of our Constitution. And I think that, it's important in our system of checks and balances that we protect the powers that belong to our branch of government.
It was not a sweeping piece of transformative legislation. It was a bridge, a temporary patch to avoid the chaos and humiliation of a government shutdown. But to Donald Trump, this bill was an insult, a non-negotiable red line that he had drawn in the sand with absolute clarity. He had been thundering from the mountaintop that this bill was garbage. He had taken to his social media platform and blasted out directives to every Republican in Congress, demanding that they kill it. He wanted deep, slashing cuts to domestic spending.
Viewers at home, breaking news. The House unanimously approved a Senate-passed bill to fund most of the Department of Homeland Security. This is a move that could soon end that 76-day shutdown that had real consequences in the lives of so many people. It'll now head to the president's desk. Here's House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking on this just moments ago. Forgive me, it was our understanding that we would have that. Now we're going to listen to him live.
The Trump administration, the president, did that. And Democrats are upset about it. So they wanted to leave that out. They wanted to orphan these 2 critical agencies that are under the umbrella of Homeland Security. I remind everybody on the Hill all the time, the Department of Homeland Security is the 3rd largest department of the federal government. It has critical responsibilities. FEMA and the Secret Service and TSA and all these other agencies.
He wanted billions upon billions of dollars for his border wall construction, a massive infusion of cash for immigration and customs enforcement to supercharge his mass deportation agenda, and a blank check for detention facilities. His ultimatum was stark and simple. If I do not get exactly what I want, I am perfectly willing to let the entire government grind to a halt. Shut it down. Let the parks close, let the paychecks stop, let the economy tremble. He thought this threat was a nuclear weapon. He thought Republican lawmakers would quiver in fear at the prospect of crossing him. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that they would fall in line. He was wrong. Speaker Johnson and a block of clear-eyed, coldly calculating House Republicans looked at the president's threats and realized they were being handed a suicide pact. They understood the electoral reality that Trump, isolated in his bubble of grievance and rage, was refusing to see. A government shutdown, occurring mere months before a midterm election that was already looking treacherous for the party, would be an act of political self-immolation. The Republican Party would be blamed for the dysfunction, the economic instability, and the shuttered services. Every vulnerable member sitting in a swing district, every moderate who won by a whisker in the last cycle, would be forced to wear the scarlet letter of chaos around their necks as they begged their constituents for another term. The polling was brutal on this point. The focus groups were apocalyptic. A shutdown would tank the party's approval rating into the abyss and likely hand the gavels of Congress back to the Democrats on a silver platter. So, in a moment of stunning clarity and political survival instinct, a group of Republicans decided that their loyalty to their own careers and to the institution of the party outweighed their loyalty to the whims of a man who was demanding they walk off a cliff. The maneuver they pulled was a thing of legislative beauty, a surgical strike designed to bypass the president's veto pen by roping in the opposition. Because the Democrats who control the upper chamber were absolutely not going to give Trump his wall money or his deportation slush fund. They were holding the line, refusing to negotiate on terms dictated by a president they view as operating outside the bounds of normal governance. The only path forward for a funding bill was a clean status quo resolution that continued spending at existing levels without the dramatic, punitive changes Trump demanded. Johnson knew this. He knew that if he followed Trump's orders, there would be no bill, no agreement, and the government would crash. He decided to go around the president. He decided to cut a deal with the reality of the divided government rather than the fantasy of absolute executive control. And the final vote tally, a heart-stopping, razor-thin margin that reflects precisely how tense this rebellion really was the undeniable proof that the mutiny was real and successful. When the clerk read the numbers and the gavel slammed down, the calculation of betrayal was etched in the record for history. The bill passed by a margin so narrow that every single vote that defied Trump was a dagger. The final count came in with a significant number of Republicans crossing the aisle, joining hands with the Democrats and pushing the bill across the finish line against the explicit, shouted, rage-filled demands of their own president. We are talking about a dozen Republican lawmakers who looked at the prospect of Trump's fury, weighed it against the certainty of a catastrophic shutdown that would destroy their re-election bids, and chose to save their own skins. These were not anonymous backbenchers who nobody has heard of. They were the most vulnerable members of the conference, the canaries in the coal mine. They represent the suburban enclaves where independent women and swing voters decide elections. They represent the districts where Trump's brand of chaos is becoming a toxic liability rather than a superpower. Their vote was a declaration of independence, a public statement that the fear of the voter now outweighs the fear of the president. It signaled that the iron grip Trump had on the party machinery, where every member was a rubber stamp awaiting his order, has been broken. When the news reached the White House, what followed was not a measured strategic recalibration or a quiet acceptance of a legislative setback. What followed was an unvarnished, live-streamed, nervous breakdown broadcast directly from the president's personal phone. The true social eruption was instant, volcanic, and deeply undignified. Trump began firing off posts in a frenzy of capital letters and exclamation marks, his fury bleeding through the screen. He branded the Speaker and the Republicans who voted for the bill as total and complete cowards. He dusted off his favorite pejorative from the early Tea Party days and began denouncing them as rhinos, Republicans in name only, the ultimate insult in his political lexicon. He screamed about a stab in the back. He claimed he had been tricked, that a brilliant and evil maneuver had been orchestrated against him. The language was the language of a man losing not just a political fight, but his grip on reality and his identity as the winner. The posts were so frantic, so vitriolic, that they created a news cycle entirely separate from the policy itself. The story became not the budget, but the president's unhinged reaction to being publicly neutered by his own hand-picked speaker. This is the spiral, the moment where the political mask slips and the raw, wounded narcissism at the core of the man is exposed and lit up by the glare of the national spotlight. The historical resonance of this moment must be understood because this is not the first time Johnson has slipped the leash and bolted for the safety of pragmatism. This is a repeat of a pattern, a recurring nightmare for Trump that proves his power is waning. It happened before, earlier in the term, when the GOP majority passed a clean, continuing resolution to keep the government open while ignoring Trump's demands for massive spending upheavals. The playbook Johnson used here was identical. Smile, nod at the president's demands publicly, and then, when the cameras are off, do the exact opposite to protect the long-term viability of the party. The repeat nature of this trickery is devastating to Trump's authority because it shows that the rebellion is not a one-off emotional reaction. It is a settled, strategic calculation by the Republican leadership. They have learned that crossing Trump results in a few days of nasty tweets, but a government shutdown results in losing the House. The math for them is simple. They would rather endure the president's insults than the electorate's wrath. Johnson's post-vote interview was a masterclass in cold-blooded political arithmetic. He did not apologize. He did not grovel. He flatly stated that passing the bill was the only way to save the majority. He essentially admitted on the record that the president's desired path was the path to electoral obliteration, and that the Republican leadership had no choice but to ignore him to protect the vulnerable members who are the backbone of the conference. This split between the governing party and the president reveals a profound ideological and tactical fracture that has been widening for months. Trump is operating on the politics of grievance and revenge, a base-focused strategy where every day is a fight to purify the party and punish the enemies. His approval numbers are hovering in dangerous territory, scraping along in the low 40s, a zone that historically precedes a massive wave election against the incumbent party. His obsession with the border wall and mass deportations fires up his core rallygoers, but the granular district-level data tells a very different story. The independent voters who decide who holds the speaker's gavel are exhausted. They are worried about the cost of living, the stability of the economy, and the prospect of endless warfare and domestic chaos. Johnson and his leadership team have access to the internal polling. They can see that a shutdown fight over a border wall that has never been fully built would be a political gift to the Democratic campaign committees. The 12 Republicans who voted for the bill are not brave idealists. They are terrified politicians reading the tea leaves and seeing a tidal wave forming on the horizon. They have concluded that hitching their wagon to Trump's sinking anchor is a losing proposition, so they are quietly cutting the rope. The fallout from this act of defiance extends into the very machinery of the Trump agenda on immigration. The political beauty and the cynical tragedy of this bill is that, practically speaking, it didn't even gut the president's ability to operate. ICE is still funded. Deportation flights are still taking off. The machinery of enforcement is still whirring. It just wasn't supercharged to the feverish level Trump wanted. This makes Trump's rage even more about personal dominance than actual policy outcome. He didn't lose the deportations, he lost the absolute command. He didn't lose the border security apparatus, he lost the ability to bend the House to his will. This dynamic exposes the reality of the current power structure in Washington. The Republican Party is no longer a monolithic church with Trump as the infallible pontiff. It is a fractured coalition where the leadership is actively subverting the president's wishes in real time to avoid catastrophe. This is a massive, screaming red flag for the midterm cycle because it threatens to depress the very voters Trump has spent years cultivating. If the MAGA base looks at this vote and concludes that the swamp in the Republican Party is just as bad as the Democrats and that voting doesn't matter because the rhinos always win, they might just stay home. A depressed base turnout flips the House and the Senate in a landslide. Trump's spiral on social media is not just performative anger, it is a window into a terrified psychology that recognizes the unthinkable is happening. He is no longer the center of the political universe to his own party. The true social tirades accusing his own party of tricking him reveal a man who has lost control of the narrative. By calling the maneuver brilliant, even in a sarcastic, angry way, he is inadvertently admitting that he has been outsmarted by the people he dismissed as weaklings. The image of the president furiously tapping away on his phone at 3 in the morning, calling his own congressional allies traitors, is not an image of strength. It is an image of a leader abandoned, a boss whose employees have locked him out of the office and are running the company without him. This public display of emotional dysregulation reinforces the cognitive and temperamental unfitness narratives that have been swirling around his presidency. For the vulnerable House members who voted for the bill, watching the president have a public meltdown over their vote is a gift. It serves as evidence to the voters back home that they are the reasonable adults in the room who stood up to a volatile bully to keep the government open. The broader implications of this political trickery are staggering when you pull the lens back and look at the entire landscape. The alliance between Trump and the institutional Republican Party has always been a transactional marriage of convenience, not a love match. The party wanted his base to win elections, and he wanted the party's machinery to legitimize his grip on power. Now, with the midterms approaching and Trump's poll numbers dragging the ticket down, the party is reevaluating the cost of the transaction. The firing of cabinet officials, the disrespect shown by the courts he appointed, and now the legislative mutiny by his own speaker, all of it points to a dying star losing its gravitational pull. The congressmen and senators are looking toward the horizon and asking themselves a very stark question. Is it safer to be tied to Trump or to distance themselves from him? The dozen Republicans who cast this vote just provided the answer for their survival. Trump's threats to primary them sound hollow when everyone knows his campaign funds are being drained by legal fees, and his personal war chest is under massive strain from the Iran conflict and other crises. The king has lost his ability to fund the execution of the traitors. The chaos on Capitol Hill is now feeding a cycle of institutional dysfunction that makes America look profoundly unstable to the rest of the world. Markets do not like seeing the President of the United States denouncing his own party's leadership as traitors while the clock ticks down on a default date. The uncertainty around whether the United States government can actually function without a presidential tantrum causing a breakdown is now baked into the global risk calculus. This is the cost of the Trump-era GOP, where personal loyalty is the only organizing principle. When that loyalty breaks, it does not lead to a calm, policy-oriented debate about the role of executive power. It leads to a digital tantrum and a circle of recriminations that paralyze the legislative process. The Democrats are sitting back and watching this with barely concealed delight, because every moment Republicans spend fighting each other is a moment they are not spending attacking Democrats. The bill passed with Democratic votes, which means Democrats just set the legislative agenda in a Republican-controlled House. They forged a temporary majority with the Speaker to stave off chaos, and in doing so, they made the President of the United States look utterly irrelevant. Where does this go from here? The path forward is a minefield of revenge and retribution. Trump's brand has always been about punching back harder. He will try to turn the base against these Republicans. He will invite challengers, he will hold rallies in their districts, and he will call them names. But this strategy has a fatal flaw. He no longer has a monopoly on the communication channels. The right-wing media ecosystem, which includes Fox News and various networks, is facing its own pressures from the administration for running bad polls and hosting disloyal guests. If those outlets sense that the power is shifting from Trump to the institutional party, they might not amplify his revenge sermons with the same volume as before. He is heading into a midterm where his name is not on the ballot, but his influence is the central question. House Republicans have just signaled that they intend to localize their races, run on their own merits, and use their votes for this spending bill to prove they can govern. They are building a wall between themselves and the Oval Office, a separation that Trump cannot easily breach. The psychological spiral that we are seeing is the direct result of a man who built his entire identity on the myth of total control, discovering that he is surrounded by functionaries who have their own survival instincts. They tricked him. They let him rant and rave about his red lines, and then they calmly gathered the votes they needed from the opposing party and checkmated him. This is what a constitutional system does to an aspiring strongman when the people around him still believe in their own power. The House is an independent branch of government. The Speaker has his own electoral base. The members have their own ambitions. Trump has spent years trying to erode this reality, trying to install a regime of personal fealty where defiance is unthinkable. This vote shows that the system is still pushing back. The Republicans who voted yes are not heroes of democracy. They are self-interested politicians. But in a system designed by Madison and Hamilton, self-interest can sometimes be the strongest guardian of the constitutional order. They saved their seats by saving the government, and in doing so, they dealt a blow to the idea that one man can command the entire legislative branch like a puppet master. The next time Trump tries to issue an order, the next time he demands an impossible legislative Hail Mary, the ghosts of this vote will haunt the chamber. Members will look at the Speaker and know that there is a way out, that they can gather a coalition of the rational and simply bypass the rage-filled tantrums coming out of the West Wing. The crack in the dam has been struck and water is pouring through. Every subsequent act of defiance, every future court loss, every staffer who leaks their frustrations to the press adds pressure to that crack. The empire of dominance that Trump constructed through sheer force of personality is giving way to the raw institutional power of the Congress and the courts. This spending bill is not just a funding mechanism. It is a declaration of independence from a Republican Party that is starting to imagine a future where it no longer gets dragged into the abyss by a leader who prioritizes his own ego over the survival of the majority. The spiral is going to get worse. The posts are going to get angrier. The desperation is going to grow. But behind the scenes, the realization is settling in that the emperor has no votes. The brilliant move by the GOP was not just about keeping the government open, it was about proving that there is a cost to absolute loyalty, and the party is no longer willing to pay it.